Hi, everyone. Welcome to the EO Wonder podcast. I'm Kalika Yap, and today I am so happy to introduce you to Natalie Bell. Natalie is the founder of Mindful Wellness, a training and coaching platform that helps entrepreneurs build their own source of calm, clarity, and resilience. She teaches mindfulness, meditation, and fierce self-compassion in a way that feels practical and easy to use in real life. Natalie has also led workshops for EO, including sessions on fierce self-compassion and how to work with shame and imposter syndrome. And on a personal note, she was my very first meditation teacher. So getting to share her with you today feels really special. Natalie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kalika. It's so good to be here, first of all, and just to be invited to be here by surprise today. And I'm thrilled. I'm super excited.
Yes, Natalie is referring to the fact that one of our guests couldn't be on the show because of an emergency doctor's appointment, and she graciously stepped in. So thank you so much for being here, because there's a lot to talk about. Today we were in a best year planning event, and you were talking about the swirl of today and what's happening. Tell us a little bit about the swirl and how mindfulness and fierce self-compassion can help us.
Yeah, great. I think each of us often feels like we're in our own orbit, our own universe of chaos at times. It feels like the swirl, as a business owner, as a human being today, we have a million things running around our head and our minds. And just this morning, there was so much already happening when you asked me to come on. And I thought, we often think we're alone, that it's just happening to me. But actually, this is the way we live, all of us, each of us. And we can use mindfulness to see that the swirl is normal. Actually, that all of these thoughts and the memories and what I'm worried about or concerned about, what I'm ruminating about, can be seen with a kind of more spacious view with mindfulness. And with fierce self-compassion, we redirect attention in a way that is not only caring, but strengthening. In other words, I can see what's difficult. I can even see my worries, my preoccupations, and come back to what I know will help me as an inner ally, as a friend, as a mentor, a kind of self-mentor. This is our own ability to be with the difficulties. And of course, I'm talking about mostly our personal experiences and our business experience. But what's happening in the world today adds to this layers and layers and layers of swirl. So here we are. How do we do it?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So, can you help define fierce self-compassion? Because a lot of people may understand the word compassion, but fierce and compassion, self-compassion may not usually go together, but please help define it.
That's right. And the word's been around for a long time, but my work recently has been influenced by Kristin Neff's latest book, and I've worked with Kristin for many years, Fierce Self-Compassion. And many people think of self-compassion or compassion as soft, as tender, as soothing, kindness. It is those things. Fierce self-compassion gives us that other side of the spectrum, so to speak. In other words, our ability to be courageous inside, brave, to motivate ourselves, to encourage ourselves. We think about a mother tending to a sick child who has a fever. And fierce self-compassion means she'll do whatever she can to make sure her baby is okay, but knowing that the sickness is going to last until it lasts, right? She'll be protective. Think about a firefighter running into a burning building to save a family, or just in the Palisades fire, what happened and what all of us had to do to actually escape that fire and help our neighbors to safely get out in time. We used fierce self-compassion. It's kindness in action. It's actually, bravely showing up in the world. And it's also bravely showing up in your inner world, which means, especially as a leader, as a business owner, that the defeating messages that so often run through our mind, the criticisms, the worries, the ruminating about this problem that I haven't been able to solve, we can redirect attention and even say, not right now. to those voices, those often harmful self-blaming voices. This is a critical part of using fierce self-compassion to be able to thrive in the midst of so much pressure that we feel on a regular basis.
So it's been a year since the Palisades fire. Both Natalie Bell and I lived in the Palisades. And how's it been for you?
Oof, well, it was quite a year. Wow. Did I learn so much? We learned a lot together to see how much grief we can experience inside, how much grief around us we had to be exposed to, and also how much compassion we needed to have just to get through it. But also, one of the biggest things I learned was this kind of bias or idea that I had that if I stay in the grief, I won't be able to function. If I keep feeling the grief, I won't be able to lead or to, create or to run a business. But actually, that's not true. In fact, I came up with a mantra. I can still be vulnerable in my grief and function well. I can still thrive, even if I'm susceptible to grief. Even if I'm feeling vulnerable, I can still be strong and lead. And that is just the way I had to work last year. I mean, you too, I'm sure.
I just remember the story you told me about how you were trying to escape the fires. At one point you were trying to get a car and then you went back and then then you had to run away literally on foot
Yeah.
from the fires.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
My husband came back to try and rescue me, and we had to abandon my car at the top of the Palisades. And we decided to run out of the canyon because we weren't being allowed. We couldn't get through. There were too many cars. You couldn't pass, but it was about a mile, maybe a bit more than that, to run through. And the fire was coming down the left side of the mountain. There's also fire down below on the right side of the mountain. And I said, let's just run for it. We're going to go rescue your car. And we did get saved by, I think we would have been okay anyway, but we did get saved by a fireman who pulled over in a small truck, said, get in. And I asked him, I said, can we really drive through this? And he said, well, I'm driving through it, so we'll be fine. I thought, all right, here we go. Wow. Yeah. Lots of courage, lots of bravery, lots of tragedy and witnessing and discovering how capable we are. It's unbelievable what we witnessed and our capacity to get through, and especially with each other, because the community has gotten together and been so supportive. And I think, no doubt about it, the work I do with fierce self-compassion, mindfulness, community is part of the magic sauce so that we see each other, we feel each other, we understand that whatever I'm going through, you are going through too. Maybe not to the same degree, but I know that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one experiencing difficulty and all of the other emotions.
And I think that's why we have a community like EO, because when you are among entrepreneurs who have to deal with all the ups and downs and the setbacks and the challenges, it's just so nice to be part of a tribe and a community that can be present for your grief and be there consistently.
Yes. Yeah, especially the self-doubting,
Mhm.
the problems I can't solve, or the failure I had recently, or the demands, the regular demands, and the kind of the chaos that can be felt, that again, that swirl. And, how do I stay focused and get back up again?
Yeah. And so you've taught lots of workshops on shame and imposter syndrome, even for EO Los Angeles. And people would come up to me and say that you had, some of the most beautiful uh, tips on how to deal with that. I think the one thing that was apparent was that entrepreneurs do experience shame and they also experience imposter syndrome, probably to a level that most people don't know.
That's right. That's right. Because entrepreneurs are taking the greatest risks. Most people don't get there or stay in it because the risk taking and the exposure is so big. So shame is definitely a big factor. And what we can learn is shame resilience. So, in other words, how can I accept the fact that shame's part of my day to day experience? It's normal, it's natural, because I'm a human being, actually, because I need to belong and be part of the tribe in order to survive, I will experience shame. And some of that is healthy shame, and much of it is unhealthy or what you might call toxic shame or maladaptive shame.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah. So, if you feel shame because you made a mistake and you recover from it pretty quickly, that would be called state shame. In other words, oh, I said something in a meeting. It was disrespectful. I had a difficult conversation about it, but I owned up to it. And now it feels like guilt. And I can say, you know what? I hope I don't do that again. And I'm still okay. So, shame, and particularly toxic or maladaptive shame, says, how could you have been so unkind? Or how could you have screwed up that meeting? You really effed up. What,
What's wrong with you?
what's wrong with you? You're not a leader that people want to see or be with. You're just going to screw up your own business like you have done a million times before. And so all of those inner critical voices that come from our childhood, that come from our parents and generations, that come from society. In fact, many of those voices, they're not even our own, but they've often been installed. And this is what happens when we're young. We install the voices that we hear, especially from caregivers. We tend to believe them, and then that gets carried into what we call trait shame. So we have a kind of susceptibility to feel shame around certain things. And so that kind of shame sticks with us, right? It makes us more prone to feeling like something's wrong with me. If I just made a mistake, why can't I just say, "Oh, I'm sorry. I made a mistake." But as Brené Brown says, shame says, "I am a mistake." All right. So, what we need to do is normalize our humanity. We all make mistakes. And fierce self compassion gives us the courage and the backup, basically, to say, you know what? I can own up to my mistakes. I can also own up to my imperfections. I get things wrong. Sometimes I don't even know what came out of my mouth because that was just another part of me. And actually, that's where this kind of parts work, that's very popular now too and very helpful, is a good way to see our behavior. In other words, sometimes I behave in a less than ideal way. Sometimes I make the wrong decision. Sometimes I'm unclear about the strategy I need to make moving forward. And I can come back to kind of my larger self to help guide best decisions. But these things happen, and I'm not unworthy because of it. I'm just a human being, doing what I need to do. So this helps us to gain a kind of stronger sense of self-worth. We're building worth. And the more we can normalize that our mind will take us there, that we'll feel bad at times. And even when we practice self-compassion, I'm still going to feel shame, tonight. I'm still going to feel it tomorrow. It's normal. Now I have this kind of shame resilience. I have a familiarity. So one of the helpful things to do is, hey, when can I know when shame is here? When it's affecting my behavior? Or when I'm not really speaking up at a meeting because I'm hiding out? What does shame do? It makes us hide. It makes us go away, go silent, or get angry. We might overreact. But oftentimes, especially for women, we tend to hide ourselves, get smaller, shrink, right? One of the things we can do is start to look for these pings. In other words, how do I know when shame is making me shrink? So there's some physical manifestations. We call this mindfulness of shame. You might notice that you get flushed in your face. Maybe you avert your gaze and you look away. You look down. Maybe there's an uncomfortable smile or laugh. Maybe you're talking too much. ooh, something's uncomfortable here. I don't know what's going on, but I'm trying to cover for myself. Maybe you feel a gut punch or like, this sense of inside of your body, inside of your being. You might start sweating. You might like lose your voice. All of these experiences, even what thoughts come through your mind, like, I'm such an idiot. Why did I say that? Or like, oh God, I don't even know what I'm doing. Or um, I don't belong here. You know, I don't measure up, right? All of these signs, these mindfulness moments are potential pings where you can say, oh, shame is here. I can watch that. I can normalize it. This is normal. I'm not the only one. And you know what? I've got your back. I'm right here. Don't shrink. Sit up taller. Raise your voice. Come back. Or you know what? If the voice of shame is too strong, like you loser, you know what you can say to that voice? Shh. Or enough. I'm done. I've heard you, and now I'm in the room. In other words, speaking from your wiser, more knowledgeable self, more compassionate self. This is available to all of us. And I think we all know moments where we've shrunk, where we didn't step up, right? Where we beat ourselves up endlessly for no good reason. So enough with that. I was telling you earlier today, some of my favorite phrases in the midst of shame are, who cares? Who cares if they think this of you? Enough already. Or so what? So what? You know what? Come back. Come back into this moment also. Right now. We can use that mindful presence to say, what happened 5 minutes ago already happened. And right now, I'm in the room with you, and I know I've got what it takes to have this conversation, to find a solution for you and with my business, or to do what's needed so I can thrive.
So, a big part of fierce self compassion is the ability to shift.
Yes, it is an ability to shift focus, to notice when you're struggling, and to help yourself first shift. You know what? I'm going down that rabbit hole, that shame or self-critical rabbit hole, to say either no or just to shift focus. And maybe we do this even physically. Fierce self-compassion includes a sense of a felt experience. In other words, an embodied experience. So again, sit up taller. You know what? Stand up straight. Get up on your feet. Feel the length of your body. Feel and hear your own voice. Even some of us need this kind of vocal training to have a voice, right? So yeah, shifting focus and then creating boundaries.
How do you practice this? Because it makes sense that someone does it, but in the moment, when you feel that shame, or what could you do?
Yeah, so let's get real about when you're feeling that gut punch, like, oh shit, I just said, I shouldn't have said that. Sometimes what we need to do is a physical shift in our body. Okay, right now, I'm going to shift right now and just get a sense of my own dignified posture. Sometimes if I'm in a meeting or if I can do this, I might need to stand up and say, you know what? I'm going to take a 1-minute break. I'm going to go walk it off and go and find my own sense of presence and compassion again to recover myself. This is very helpful, right? Um, in in As you practice, you can even just name it in the moment. In other words, I'm in a meeting with you and I can notice I just flubbed. I just said what I didn't mean to say. And I can say, you know what? I just want to take a pause right now and go back because I just realized I said something that was probably disrespectful to you. And I'd like to apologize for that and tell you what I really would like to say. And I just want to own up to that right now. In other words, in the current moment, the more you practice, the more you are able to recover more quickly. And this is really, really helpful. In other words, we become these fierce self-compassion warriors. We become shame warriors. We become shame resilient. And this is something that we can claim. In other words, I can be with probably some of the most embarrassing moments ever, or some of the moments that I never want to tell any of my peers about, right? I don't want to admit what I really think. That's shame, right? It's really the hardest emotion we can deal with, and it has downward effects every day in our lives for most of us. We can normalize that.
What if it's deep-seated? You had talked a little bit earlier about how this often comes from caregivers, parents, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs who've had situations in their family where their parents or mother or father are telling them that they're not no good, etc. How does someone remove that deep-seated shame?
Yeah. So it may take more work. We may need to work with a therapist or a community. I think, again, one of the biggest downward effects of shame is isolation. So Chris Germer from Harvard, who is writing a book on self-compassion for shame, and who I've worked with for the last 3 years, teaching this 8-week program, Self-Compassion for Shame, has identified actually that Kristin Neff's model of self-compassion, it has 3 parts: mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. All right. Well, what we've discovered, what Chris and Kristen both discovered, and what we've discovered in our work, is that those 3 elements are the exact opposites of shame. Because what does shame make you feel? It makes you feel, so instead of being mindful, you are ruminating,
Judgmental.
right? Judgmental, ruminating, or over identifying with the moment, with this current moment. Common humanity, instead of common humanity, like everyone's feeling this, we feel extremely isolated. And that is probably the most difficult thing as a business owner, right? Is to think, I am so ineffectual, or I'm a fraud, or I don't belong here in this business. What am I doing?
Or I'm not making as much revenue as that
Exactly.
guy,
Right.
girl.
So that isolation is terribly painful. And of course, it has effects where we stop showing up more and more. So the opposite of isolation, common humanity. Other people, other entrepreneurs are having the same exact thought right now, or a very similar feeling to this. And then the third aspect, self-kindness. With shame, we have self-criticism. Actually, the harsh inner criticism, basically, is the tool of shame. We knock ourselves down, we whip ourselves into shape, we bully ourselves with those voices. And to your point, if you were treated badly, neglected, abused, bullied as a child by your caregivers or siblings or a lot of schoolmates, you're likely to be more susceptible to shame. And it will mean that you have to work more on it. In other words, you need to identify what are those inner voices that got installed. And you know what? One thing we do in this program is we say no to these messages, to these harming messages. We say no more, not mine. That's not me. No, enough, in other words. And this is where we have to do it not only to personal disconnections, because as children, we had personality traits that we were shamed for. Maybe you were too shy. Maybe you were a procrastinator. Maybe you were messy. Maybe you were too rambunctious, like I was, and you were shamed for it. Well, we carry that shame proneness with us around today. And we can say, no, you know what? I didn't place that shame onto me. That came from outside of myself. The same is true with cultural messages. Many of us feel like the outgroup, right? We don't belong in one way or the other due to our color, our gender, our cultures, our religions, you name it, right? In fact, how many of us, we can raise our hands right now, how many of us feel like we're the outgroup? Most of us, right? So this is also a big cause of imposter syndrome, this feeling that I don't belong. I never belonged quite much, right? And society has imposed those messages onto us. Again, this is kind of this outer shaming message that now I somewhere believed. We can also say no to those cultural messages, and we need community to do that, you know? Yeah.
And if we're not aware that we had this, I guess, abuse when you're younger, is it often the case that we also treat our loved ones that way as well?
Yeah, it gets passed on. This is, I think any parent can say this, like, oh my God, how did I just do that to my child? Right. Or how could I behave that way? Well, generation after generation passes down traumas, passes down habits, um, bad behaviors, right? And particularly shaming as a way of punishing, as a way of controlling, and trying to create behavior change in not so healthy a way, unfortunately.
So, what's the difference between shame and imposter syndrome? Is there a difference?
Yeah, imposter syndrome is really a kind of collection of different experiences that are related to shame. I'd say they're a sign of shame, um, but imposter syndrome may include other factors, right? And other experiences. Most of them, though, related to shaming experiences. In other words, being part of the out group, right? Telling the story that I am not accomplished, even though I've done all of these things. In fact, the most intelligent, most accomplished people in the world are highly susceptible to imposter syndrome. And women, again, are more susceptible to that. And that's most likely due to cultural upbringing, right? In other words, we don't claim successes, we don't name them enough or outwardly express them enough. We need to catch up to our story. So often we're caught in parts of ourselves that are telling that story from 10 years ago, right? So we could say that functionally they're the same thing. And we have tools to be able to manage it. And even just to identify imposter syndrome, right? Uh, some of us don't call it imposter syndrome. We just know that we're not showing up the way we need to show up,
Or
right?
hiding?
We're hiding, or we're procrastinating, right? Or that perfectionism is part of it, right? I'm not going to launch this product until I know that it will be validated enough, or I know I've gotten some kind of some other way I can prove that I'm not going to fail. And especially this is true if we failed at other times, right? Or we're coming off of a difficult season or quarter, right? Now what? Now I'm a bit more nervous, a bit more anxious about my next launch. Am I going to have the guts? And beautifully enough, the research shows that self-compassion allows you the courage to try a second time, to be less afraid of failing. You know why? Because you've dealt with your inner critic with another voice. Hey, if I fail and I beat myself up for it, I've got another ally here. I'm going to say, no, you know what? I get it. Got it. I failed, or we didn't do exactly the numbers we wanted to do. And here's how we can course correct. And I've reached out to another colleague or another vendor or whoever else I need to reach out to help me course correct. Right.
And it can also lead to success. I remember one of our other guests, Kendra Scott, she had she's this billionaire jewelry
Yeah.
maker, and she's also an EO, but her first company was a failure. She had to close a retail shop, a retail hat shop. And her thought of just opening up another shop, which became hugely successful, that was, I think, where she probably had to come to terms with, am I going to believe that, this failure of a business is going to define me, or I'm just going to try again?
Right. Yeah. In other words, can I have the
Compassion.
enough compassion and courage? So that kind of courageous compassion, that'd be another word for fierce self-compassion, that courageous compassion to say, I'm going to redefine myself again. In other words, sometimes we just need to believe a couple of things, like very basic foundational things. I need to believe that I can be kind to myself when I screw up or when I'm not accepted even by the group. When I'm rejected, I can still include myself in the circle of humanity, in the circle of kindness, and I can redefine myself. In other words, who's defined me anyway, right? Who said that I was this way? Or who said I couldn't do this? I remember so many times people telling me, oh, you can't just start your own business. You got to work through you got to work from the ground up. It's going to take 1,000,000 years. Or, you can't do that mindfulness and self-compassion business. What's that?
Right. Before it became chic.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Like, what are you talking about? Or I like these other ones too, like, oh, you're not artistic, or you're not creative, or you're not, smart enough. We've all heard these voices and we've all installed them at one point or another in our life. And when things go wrong or when we fail, we're more likely to hear those voices. These are negative core beliefs. We all have them. There are like 12 of them, universally felt by everybody. And that's another way, again, to be mindfully aware of shame again. Oh, there's that negative core belief. Oh, you know what? That's not my voice. I didn't create that belief. No, not now. Not in this moment. I need another voice. So we get resourced. The more mindful we can be, the more we build the muscles of compassion, self-compassion, the more we can grab from the toolbox, so to speak, right? When we face very unexpected problems. And this is happening every day, isn't it? Right?
Yeah. And so a lot of things, I love also Tara Brach's 2 words, this too, including it in our experience.
Yeah. 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 This too, this and this is an equanimity phrase. Okay. So we've probably heard this term equanimity. It sounds a bit abstract, but really, an equanimity can be built with mindful practice and mindful presence in your daily life. And equanimity is really this sense that I can be with a circumstance in a balanced way, even though there are two opposing experiences here right now. In other words, I'm open-minded and open-hearted, present and feeling okay, but in front of me, someone is struggling, or a family member is struggling, or I've got a coworker or one of my employees is struggling, and there's a threat now to my business. So I'm noticing threat, but I'm also noticing my own calm presence. And equanimity gives us the perspective that I can control what is in my control, and yet I'm not entirely in control of all the circumstances, all of the causes and conditions. And so we can say equanimity phrases like this too, this or um, may I be with what is. Things are the way they are. Everyone is on their own life journey, right? In other words, this gives us that perspective. We have to, in order to thrive in life, we've got to see and overcome multiple challenges. In some way, it gets harder, but we get wiser. The more we see, the more exposure we have to all of the challenges, but then the more capable we are as we practice with presence, with kindness, with inner strength, and community again. In other words, I see you, you see me, and now we're allies together in our shared intention to be compassionate, to be human, to be fully human, right?
You also have some exercises that's related to journaling. And how important is that to practice fierce self-compassion?
Well, no doubt about it. Evidence is clear that journaling and writing your own language of fierce self-compassion is key. So, A couple of the things you can do is to write a compassionate letter to yourself. Kristen Neff has this great exercise too, but and probably many of us have done this for years at some point, journaling, um, writing out what we're feeling, but also recentering with your own compassionate self. And if you can't access that, you can think about a compassionate friend. In other words, a compassionate teacher, a dear friend who's been kind to you, generous to you, a benefactor. Maybe it's an ideal figure. It might be a religious figure. It might be someone you've admired, an author, a great leader in the world that you can imagine as a kind of inner voice. And you can write from the perspective of that inner compassionate voice that says to you, hey, I see you. I know it's been hard. One of the first things I think that's important to journal is just to validate what you're going through. So this isn't a bypass, but just to name. In other words, that naming, or, there's been great work by Creswell and his colleagues at UCLA in 2007, that just simply naming a difficult emotion, naming it, noting it, helps to reduce the stress reaction in the brain, the amygdala. So you get reductions in cortisol, reduction in adrenaline, to actually calm yourself when you're noticing difficulty. So naming what you're experiencing, and when you're journaling, validating it, put it on paper, say it. You're almost like saying it out loud. Then your prefrontal cortex is online. Now you can help downregulate stress. So validate what's going on. And then from the place of your compassionate self, write like an inner mentor, like a great inner coach, right? In other words, what would your most favorite coach, if you had one, say to you when you were struggling? What would your best ally say to you? You know what? You've got this. You know better. Things have been difficult. You've made some mistakes, but we can get up and try again. And let's find the resources to help you. And of course, as we're writing these things, these phrases become our own self-compassion language. So it can be helpful to even get one of those phrases, put it on a yellow sticky note, put it on the refrigerator, put it on your computer screen. I've got you. We've got this, right? In other words, what helps me to come back to my sense of resourcing myself again? And even if I have to borrow that voice from someone else, borrow it. Install it. You've already installed other critical voices. We've got to do the same with a compassionate voice. So the journaling can be really helpful. And we can write our struggles, we can validate them, and then just come back. What else is helpful? What else is helpful?
I remember this one exercise that you did where you said, let's say you screwed up. What are you saying to yourself? And let's say your friend does the exact same thing. What are you saying to your friend? And such stark differences.
Oh, yeah. So, yes, this is probably one of the best reflections I've ever seen, right? And actually one of the biggest causes of shifting mindsets. So a lot of this is mindset, right? In other words, is compassion a mindset? Is fear self-compassion a mindset? In order to be with shame, or in order to even run my business. So how do we do that? One of the first things is just to think, when you had let's say you were feeling well and you had a really good friend who failed at something, or they're struggling. Maybe they're going through a health crisis. Maybe they're going through a divorce. Maybe they're in some kind of a life crisis. How do you talk to them? How do you show up for them? And actually, to make this more embodied, remember how it is you even look to them. What's the expression in your face? What's the tone of voice you use? What words do you say? What's your body like? In other words, are you, maybe you offer a hug or a hand on the shoulder? What attitudes do you have? In other words, are you patient with them, forgiving of them, encouraging for them? Hey, it's not the end of the world. You got this, Then, okay, so you've felt that, right? In other words, you've just touched into compassion. You know compassion when you are like that with a friend. So shift roles. and recall a time that you made a mistake or that you failed at something or you were feeling badly. Maybe this the last big stressor in your life the last week. Well, can you recall how you responded to yourself? What words were you saying to yourself? What tone of voice? What was the attitude? Even can you feel in your physical body this kind of inner tension, tightness, constriction, shaming voices, right? Maybe you wanted to disappear and, go invisible. That's shame, right? Maybe you wanted to hide, or maybe you just couldn't stop beating yourself up, or you just were. Maybe it's not even that clear. Maybe just a sense of deflation, like low confidence, like low energy. All of these are signs of shaming, inner critical experiences. And if you could turn to yourself the way you treated a friend, what might be different? How might you be able to turn that around and actually be able to function and thrive, right? This is powerful and it's really clear. Pretty much nobody gets away with this reflection. Like it's most of us, the research shows, are much harsher to ourselves than we are to a good friend.
And it's visceral,
Yes.
like immediate, like, oh, if we did it, well, what's wrong with you that you, like, even if you get sick, like, God, what's wrong with you?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
get it together.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, we are so hard. Yeah, with just like even when we wake up with a cold, it's like, oh God, and then
How
here
dare you? get
yeah,
sick?
we go to a meeting, we get on Zoom or whatever it is, and we start coughing, and we just all of that judgment that comes, and we blame ourselves. You know, why is this happening to me? And one thing I would say too, it's normal to blame yourself. It's normal to criticize yourself because actually your body, your nervous system is under threat. When things go wrong, there is real threat. And that's been wired into us from the beginning of time. And it's been wired we're wired for survival, not for happiness. Okay. But we have the ability to see that with mindful awareness and to shift. We need to be shapeshifters. We need to recover ourselves more quickly. And sometimes we need to move. We need to offer postures. If you remember in that workshop on the imposter syndrome with EO, we did some physical postures.
Like a warrior.
Yeah, warrior posture. You might place hands on your hips. That standing up taller. You might even bring your arms up. You've seen Amy Cuddy's talk probably on TED Talks. All of these postures help us to embody a shift, right? In other words, what does strength look and feel like? What does courage look and feel like? And if you're down in the dumps, what does courage look like? It looks like meeting yourself where you are and going, ooh, this is hard right now. So that, again, name it. So saying name it to tame it, we've got to do that over and over and over again. And it's the quickest way to shift. Name it to tame it.
And I also understand too, like sometimes people may want to journal things like, I'm fearful, but rather than do that, or I'm depressed, rather than saying I am, just saying depression is here.
Yeah.
Shame is here.
Yeah.
Fear is here.
That's right. So this is a great mindful practice of noting another gift of mindfulness is that we discover that we are not our emotions, we're not our thoughts, we're not our experiences. We are a collection of all of those things. They are still real, but they're not all of us. They're just a part. And so if I say I'm depressed, it's like all of me is depressed. Or if I'm bad or I suck, that's shame too, right? Shame is usually this global negative self-evaluation, right? But as soon as we become an observer, as soon as we become more spaciously aware, we can say, just a part of you is going through that. So yeah, in journaling, it can be helpful to say, like, I'm noticing depression. I'm noticing anger. I'm noticing fear. And what else am I noticing? look around. Oh, right now I'm doing a podcast with Kalika. And even though I struggled this morning with the swirl, I'm back up again, right?
Yeah.
And that's the complexity of our lives. I think we don't need to shy away from that. Life is challenging and we can do it. In other words, the mindset of fierce self-compassion is we really can be, even with the most difficult of human emotions, shame, imposter syndrome, feeling like a failure. And guess what? We all know every great successful entrepreneur out there has had the same experience. And there are countless stories, right?
I love the poem. I think it's called The Guest or The Guest House.
Yeah. So invite them all in, all of the difficulties, all of these visitors that are hard, that are challenging, all of these doubts, invite them in to your home. Now, this is not so easy when we don't have the tools, but remember, all of these practices, all of these qualities and attributes I'm talking about, they're really skills we can develop. In other words, they're trainable. This is the good news, right?
And it's temporary because, like, if you think of depression or fear or shame or imposter syndrome as a guest, it's temporary.
Yeah.
And still inviting them in because it's already here. They're already there. They've showed up at your door.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one of a recent student of mine, we just finished another 8-week cohort, said something brilliant. He said, when I'm noticing shame, I'll say an expression like kaboom or bam or, just something like whenever I'm noticing it, like something to wake me up, something to go like, oh, pay attention, notice. And I loved that. Like, in other words, how do we create our own map to discover when we're being taken down by shame and imposter syndrome? How do we recognize the terrain, in other words? And again, the more we practice, the more we can see it, identify it, and shift. Right.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us in the podcast. How can people find you, book you on workshops, or come have you speak on EO?
Yeah, well, you can go to my website, nataliebell.com. Look me up on Instagram, Natalie S. Bell, and just know that I'm available in different formats. Some of the work I do is very deep training, and I also have smaller kind of quick access mini practices, which I think most of us need. And those are going to be more kind of rapidly digestible. And so I'm really, really just extraordinarily impressed by what I see people discovering. Actually, that the wisdom's it's not my wisdom. Actually, it's yours. And it's each of us have this incredible capacity. Actually, we already know how to overcome these problems. We just need to access it and we need to practice it. And then it's just unbelievable the kind of awakenings and incredibly self-empowering transformations that I've witnessed in a very short time.
Thank you so much for helping entrepreneurs build calm and resilience. You're such a blessing to this world.
Oh, thank you, Kalika. Really, thank you for having me. So appreciate you and everything you do.
You're the